All right, Bible class. Just going to show y'all. I had somebody ask about this. Is my recording studio. Let me move this down real quick. This is the piano, and there's that. There's my Bo Jackson autographed helmet, by the way. Yeah, and then some drums and blah blah blah. That quilt, my wife had that made for me. It's T-shirts from different places that I've worked or sang, and you've seen my instruments and all that. But anyway, so here you go. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. So there we go. All right. Hope y'all are doing well. I love these Bible stories. And you were supposed to read a couple of chapters before today. One was 2 Kings chapter 1, the other 2 Chronicles chapter 21. And again, we will next year for Bible, if I have you, we will discuss at length whether we're using this book or not, and Lord willing, I'll be back next year. Pray that be the case. I'm planning on it, and hopefully all will go well. But I want to explain at length, and we'll spend several days on it, why Judah and Israel split and the implications of it. So, but understand we're dealing with Israelites, but you've got the country of Israel, you've got the country of Judah, and Israel was wicked from the get-go. And we also see Judah had some spurts that they followed God, and we're going to get in today where they both turn evil. Now we're going to start in 2 Kings, and just a couple of things. Israel was where Ahab was the ruler, and his wife Jezebel. And Ahab dies. This is 2 Kings chapter 1 that you were supposed to read. And Ahaziah, he had fallen through the latticed window of his upstairs room in Samaria and was injured. Ahaziah. And Ahaziah was the king of Israel. He, as your book says, served for a year, a whole year. And so he fell through this latticed window. So I assume it was a window, didn't have glass in it. It had a piece of lattice work to give you a little bit of privacy, and you could still get a breeze through it, that type of thing. He fell through it upstairs, and he was injured. And so he sends some messengers out to go inquire of Beelzebub. Would he recover or not? And so these messengers take out, and God comes to Elijah. The angel of the Lord comes to Elijah and says, hey, go head him off at the pass. And so he meets him out there, and he says, hey, is there not a God in Israel that y'all have to go to, a fake God, to inquire as to what's going to happen to the king? And tell the king this, that you will not get up from your sick bed. You're going to die. This ball game for you. And so they go back, instead of going on their journey where they were supposed to go to the priest of this fake god, or they were going to go inquire. They go back and they say, "Hey, this guy met us, and he said you're going to die." And he said, "Who was he?" And they said, "Well, he's a hairy guy, has a leather belt around his waist." That must have been all it took for him to know that it was Elijah. Now, I want you to notice something real quick. We talked about Elijah going through the pity party, as I like to call it. His discouragement, his depression, his downtroddenness, any D that you want to insert there, where he said, hey, God, go ahead and take my life. I'm the only one left. They're trying to kill me. I'm not worthy of, being the same as my fathers were. Go ahead and kill me. He went through this pity party. Notice God kept talking to him and said, hey, what are you doing here, Elijah? I've got work for you to do. And we see now this renewed empowered, emboldened Elijah. Here he is sending a message to the king saying, hey, you're going to die. You're going to die. And we'll see some other things that Elijah does that show that he has come back from this. Anytime we're depressed, anytime we're downhearted, anytime we're discouraged, God can bring us back from that. So keep it in mind. But they say, yeah, it was a hairy man with a leather belt around his waist. Oh, that must have been Elijah. And he says it's Elijah the Tishbite. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, you go and you send 50 men and you tell him, man of God, the king declares, come down. So Elijah's sitting up on this hillside and 50 men go out with this captain and they say, Elijah, come down. And Elijah says, hey, may fire from heaven come down and consume you and your 50 men if I'm a man of God. Well, he must have been a man of God because guess what? And 50 men plus the captain gone. Just burn up. Charbroil. So the king finds out about this and he sent another captain with his 50 men and said, go get this man down. They go out there and they say, hey, Elijah, if you're a man of God, come down immediately. That's what the king tells you to do. And he said, if I'm a man of God, may fire come down and consume you. Boom. So we're talking 100 men plus the captain so far have become crispy critters. Pretty cool stuff. Then the king sends a third captain with his 50 men, but this third captain exercises some wisdom and some godly wisdom. And he says, man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious to you. He said, don't have mercy on us. Don't kill us. Don't send fire. And the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, go down with him. Don't be afraid of him. Go down and talk with him. So he said, because you've sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it because there's no God in Israel? There's a God in Israel you can acquire of. You don't have to go to foreign gods. And he said, because of that, your king Ahaziah is not going to recover. He's going to die. And guess what? Verse 17 says Ahaziah died according to the word of God. And since he had no son, Joram became king in his place. And this happened, and the Bible always references, once this split between Israel and Judah, it will say this happened in the second year of Judah's king, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat. So it gives reference to each other, and that gives historical data that, hey, this was in the second year of Judah's new king. So we can see how that works. But he died, and it talks about the rest of Ahaziah's reign along with his accomplishments are written in the historical record of Israel's kings. So we see that in that chapter. Then we flip over to 2 Chronicles chapter 21. This picks up after Jehoshaphat, and the battle does not belong to us, it belongs to God, that we talked about. And it says, Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers. Now, Jehoshaphat, if you'll recall, followed God. Jehoshaphat trusted in God. Was he perfect? No. And if you'll read back in chapter 20, he actually made a treaty with Israel to build some ships. And because he did, God had the ships destroyed because he was cohorting with Israel, who was purely wicked. But Jehoshaphat dies, and Jehoram became king. Now, Jehoram had several brothers that list them. Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. Yeah, these were all sons of King Jehoshaphat. And King Jehoram is so scared of them, and he had given all of them all of these valuables. He had given them fortified cities throughout Judah. Jehoram is so worried about them, he wants to establish himself as king, to kind of throw his weight around. So he has all of them killed. He has all of them cut down with a sword. And then Judah's King Jehoram. Remember, this is Judah we're dealing with, not it. We were dealing with Ahaziah and Israel. This is Jehoram and Judah. And it says he reigned for 8 years in Jerusalem, and he walked in the ways of the king of Israel. What does that mean? Well, he was wicked. The kings of Israel were wicked. And so it's saying that Jehoram walked in those ways. He walked in the way of Ahab, who was the king of Israel. And it says, this gives you a little tidbit into information. Be careful who you marry. He had married Ahab's daughter. That was his wife. Ahab, wicked king. Jezebel, wicked queen. And Ahab's daughter, of course, she's going to more than likely be wicked. Very important statement here. It says, but for the sake of the covenant the Lord had made with David, he was unwilling to destroy the house of David, since the Lord had promised to give a lamp to David and to his sons forever. What does that mean? God had promised David, if you'll recall, when we talked about this in class, this was one of the crucial points in one of our passages. God said, David will always have a king on the throne. And because of God's promise, God leaves Jehoram and at least one of his sons in place. When God makes a promise, he's going to keep it. And we see that. All right, during Jehoram's reign, it talks about Edom rebelled against Judah. They went out to attack. They were unsuccessful. And Edom was always causing problems with Judah ever since. And it says, Jehoram also built high places in the hills of Judah, and he caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves, and he led Judah astray. We talked about high places in class, where they would offer sacrifices to these gods. They would build them on high places. That's why they were called high places. And they would offer sacrifices to other gods. He built these throughout Jerusalem. And it says he caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves. He led Judah astray. So you see the kind of king that he is. And so Elijah, bold again, he writes a letter to Jehoram. And basically he says that the Lord's going to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and all your possessions with horrible affliction. And we see that God does. He allows the Philistines and the Arabs who live near the Cushites, they attacked King Jehoram. And they carried off possessions. They carried off the king's son and wives. They invaded his palace. And it says not a son was left except for Jehoahaz, his youngest son. So God's leaving one in place, Jehoahaz. But the rest of them, they're carried off and done away with. So Jehoram, his palace is raided. Everything he's got valuable is gone. All of his kids, his wife, they're gone except for Jehoahaz. They're killed. All right, so this is the wild part. Elijah also says, by the way, Jehoram, here's what's going to happen to you. Your intestines, you're going to be struck with a disease. Your intestines are going to come out day by day because of this disease. Your intestines are going to come out day by day. I don't know if it was like parvo or what, but this is sad. And it says, this continues, after these things the Lord afflicted him in his intestines with an incurable disease. Verse 19, this continued day after day until 2 years passed. So for 2 years, every day this dude's intestines are coming out. Every day he is sick beyond sickness. And then he died from this severe illness. And they give us a time capsule. It says he took over as king when he was 32. He died 8 years later. That means he was 40. Listen to what it said. He died to no one's regret. He was also buried in Jerusalem, but not in the tombs of the king. That shows how little respect the people had for him and how little liked he was. Your book in the application section, page 216 and 217. Quickly, I want to look at that. It says, even when tragedy struck, King Ahaziah did not turn to the Lord. Rather, he turned to the powers of evil for counsel. Ahaziah fell through the window. He's wanting to know what to do. Tragedy struck. Where did he go? Where did he turn? Well, he turned to evil, powers of evil. Who do you turn to when tragedy strikes? Do you go to God immediately? Is that your first response? I'm going to pray to God, something bad has happened. I'm finding more and more that Christians try to handle it themselves, or they try to seek counsel from someone. A lot of times it's not godly counsel. Who do you turn to when bad things happen? Hopefully, you seek godly counsel, or you go directly to the source, God the Father, and say, God, I've got a problem. I fell through a window. Am I going to recover? Will you help me with this? But Ahaziah did not want to do that. Second of all, application. Judah was now disturbed and shocked by invasions, talking about Judah now, by the capture of their people and by a plague and sickness. A few years before they had been prosperous and godly. Now they are in reproach among nations. Why did all of this happen to them? Because of their king, King Jehoram. Jehoram walked in the ways of Ahab and the kings of Israel instead of walking in the ways of his father Jehoshaphat. As a result, the nation went downhill. The nation developed enemies. The nation developed sickness. The nation developed poverty. This shows how important a godly leader is. Your book in bold, The Sins of a National Leader Affect the Entire Nation. How true that is. Listen, this goes to rubber meets the road elections. You're getting to the age before long, scary thought, you'll be able to vote. You'll be able to go into a voting booth and vote for a political candidate. This is why it's important. Listen, we need to vote for godly people. We need godly people in charge of this nation, of our states, of our towns, because ungodly leaders, people who don't trust in God, can bring a whole people down. We've seen it before in this nation. We'll probably see it again in this nation. We need to vote for people that fear God, trust in God. Number 3, application. We'll finish with this. Jehoram's subjects, Jehoram being the king of Judah, the subjects began to revolt. The Edomites revolted from under the dominion of Judah. Also did Libnah revolt from under his hand. These nations were bold to reject Jehoram's authority because he had rejected God's authority. Your book says when we submit to the authority of God, then he will subdue the sins that would dominate us. I will say this, that the Edomites and Libnah, they were right to revolt. When you see a leader that is not being godly, now, I'm not saying go out and take up a gun or anything like that, but I'm saying you do not follow them with your whole heart. Okay? Yes, we're to render to Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. But by the same token, you can't just go along blindly and say, okay, well, the king says, the president says, the governor says we should do this, so yeah, we're going to do it. That's great. You have to stand for your principles. You have to stand for what God's word says. You can't just blindly follow people, especially when they're going against God's word and against God's ways. Jehoram walked in the ways of evil. He betrayed God. And people were revolting because they saw what he was doing. Keep that in mind. Listen, don't follow people blindly. Be careful who you listen to. And people can lead you down a wrong path. Make sure you stay on the right path. Listen, tomorrow is chapel. In history, you've got a Zoom meeting. We won't meet for Zoom in Bible. We may talk a little bit of Bible when we're meeting with our Zoom, but tomorrow we will have chapel on Facebook. Make sure you watch that. And then we will on Monday, we're going to do something a little. Go ahead and plan on the next 6 verses of Matthew, and then we had a meeting this morning. Go ahead and memorize those, and we're going to do a little something different for verses 11 through 16. So go ahead and learn 5 through 10. Do verses 5 through 10 this week. And then for 11 through 16, we're going to do something a little different. We're getting near the end of the year. Y'all hang in there. Prayers, love, blessings. Miss y'all. And we'll see you tomorrow in World History for Zoom.